Hi, everyone. This is Josie Bartlett again from Prevention and Intervention Strategies. Thank you for logging in and listening to our introduction on integrated pest management, also called IPM. This training will be led by Susanna Reese from Stop Pest. We're so thankful for her to be giving us this training. She's a wealth of knowledge, and we're really glad that she can kind of walk us through this transition. So integrated pest management is going to be the new norm for the housing authority. This is something that we're already doing. So integrated pest management really pesticides will be used kind of as a secondary and when needed. So residents won't see so much spraying. Instead, pest control professionals, our exterminators, will be going into apartments and looking for why pests are in a place, looking at basements. Are there holes around pipes? Are there this? This is what this training is going to be about. And beyond just the exterminators, the maintenance workers will be working on this. Management staff will need to look at the basements. Are there holes around pipes that need bricklaying work order? Is there a bed bug issue? Do you need to order a bed bug mattress cover off of Oracle would that help protect? So it's all about knowing what is going on and how you can complement the baiting. Are things pruned in a way? And then also messaging that. A lot of you are front of the line staff that talk to residents every day. Some people might be wondering, why am I not getting pesticides sprayed in my apartment as much? Well, if you don't have roaches, we don't want to use pesticides because it's more healthy for you. And we want to close up the hole instead of using pesticides as first method. So starting in February, it'll be HUD mandated that we do 100% IPM. So everyone will be on board. We're kind of doing this slow roll into it. We're already doing a lot of IPM work, such as the targeted relief blitz that a lot of your developments have had. These are apartments that have had multiple pest complaints in the last year, and maintenance workers and exterminators have been going into them to do extensive IPM work. The neighborhood rat reduction program is also a good example of IPM work, where development staff are looking at, are there holes around pipes that need to be filled up by bricklayers? Should our window wells be sealed? Should I prune up bushes in certain areas or put gravel? It's all about things that could complement the baiting, exclude rats so that we don't have to use as much of the pesticide. So this is what the training will be. So without any further ado, I am going to introduce Susanna Reese from Stop Pests. And if you have any additional questions at the end, please give me a call, shoot an email. If you have any IPM questions, you can always reach out to our technical advisors, Denise Torres and Ron Griffin. And so now I will turn it over to Susanna. Thanks, Susanna.
Thank you, Josie. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today to learn about integrated pest management and this new approach that NYCHA is going to be taken. I'm from Cornell University's Northeastern IPM Center's Stop Pest and Housing program. Just a little background, Stop Pest is funded by HUD, and we provide training and technical assistance to all the federally funded housing sites all over the United States. NYCHA has been working with a team of experts, including Dr. Stephen Kells from the University of Minnesota, who is a specialist on integrated pest management in public housing. Does all of his research in the Minneapolis Public Housing and several other housing authorities in Minneapolis. And Dr. Bobby Corrigan, who some of you might know of from his infamous work with rats in New York City. He's really the best in the nation. So we have two people who are really qualified to help kind of to reevaluate methods and create new protocols to fight pests. Dr. Stephen Kells wanted to kind of kick this off as a campaign. That's why I have a new NYCHA, a new future in quotes, because we want you guys to think about this as a campaign for healthy housing and just to inspire a little optimism. We tend to think, oh, get discouraged and defeatist about pests. We know that there will always be pests, but there are methods where we can make improvements, and we know that there'll be introductions, but we can prevent some of those introductions from becoming all-out heavy infestations. And I hope that you guys see some of those benefits. I know you will see some of those benefits, but that said, there's a little bit of work ahead of us. Oops, sorry. I'm going to take a moment to do some housekeeping here. If those people that don't have sound right now maybe can look at this slide and figure out that if their computer speakers aren't working, there's a call-in number you can use. But for those that can hear me, there's a chat box feature that we would like you guys to use to ask questions. There's also a Q&A, but I think Josie's going to be monitoring the chat box more than the Q&A. To find that chat box, you have to see where my little blue arrow is pointed. You have to go to those 3 dots, hit those dots, and then write a message to all panelists. Don't write a message to me because I'm not monitoring the chat box. I'm delivering the presentation. Josie will be monitoring the chat box. And we'll answer questions at the end. Also in the chat box, Josie is going to put a link for a quiz that you can take to get your certificate for completing this webinar. That link will also be sent to you in an email a day after you take the webinar. So just be aware, some people had some trouble getting the link to work. Some people got it to work fine. We think it might be a firewall issue, so we're going to work on that. If you do have issues and can't make the link work, we'll troubleshoot around that, and if all else fails, we'll send it to you by email, the quiz. So I have a quick disclaimer. The material that you're going to see in my presentation is supported by an interagency agreement between HUD's Office of Healthy Homes and Lead Hazard Control and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture with the USDA. The material is based on research-based and balanced and objective approaches to pest management. I might name a product or a vendor that in no means is meant to be an endorsement. I'm trying to give you the best information, but inevitably we're going to see and we're going to talk about products, and we try not to be biased in our presentation. I also have an additional disclaimer. I know that NYCHA is very different from most of the housing authorities, or from all the housing authorities I've ever worked with, because of your sheer size. So some of the things I might say, you're gonna maybe roll your eyes at, you're gonna think, oh, that's not realistic, or maybe I've oversimplified. My job as a trainer is to give you good information, and then your job is to see what applies to you, what applies to your particular job, and what's gonna apply and work in your particular circumstances and your building. So today we're going to talk about what integrated pest management is, IPM, and why it's better than just applying pesticides. What are the best ways to control the 3 main pests of housing, cockroaches, rodents, and bed bugs, what role you play, and what changes in pest management you and the residents can expect at NYCHA. I often hear, oh, well, it's affordable housing, it's public housing, we're going to have pests, and there's several reasons, as you can see, why we shouldn't just accept that pests are a fact of life. They cause a lot of health problems, and so we should be trying to do our best to eliminate them, or at least manage them. We might not be able to eliminate them completely, but we can prevent a lot of these heavy infestations from occurring. Because pests trigger and cause asthma, cockroaches and mice are the #1 cause of asthma in urban youth. So a big concern there. They can bite us, they can contaminate our food. They lead people to overreact and ignore pesticide labels, leading to overexposure of chemicals. And they can transmit diseases, especially I get concerned with mice are just ubiquitous. They're everywhere in New York City and in every home. And we do have a lot of data that mice and rats do carry diseases. So it is for your health and the residents' health that we want to keep these out of our buildings as much as possible. And then we have bed bugs that are hitchhiking on our belongings. And finally, pests will violate housing codes. So our hope is to make homes healthier, and we know that IPM is a technique that will help. At this point in when I'm doing a live training, I usually canvas the audience and ask them, well, how have you fought pests? And I get one of two answers or two answers pretty commonly. The first one I get is, oh, I call my guy, I call the exterminator, I call somebody else, and I don't think about it. And what we're going to talk about today is to kind of change that way of thinking, that we are part of the pest control solution. Everybody has a role to play, and it's not something we can outsource. We all have a little role. Of course, your extermination crew or your pest management professionals have a big role to play, and as do residents, but we all can play a part, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The other answer I get is, how have we fought pests? And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this scenario. In my first apartment I lived in, and the first time I saw a cockroach, I unloaded an entire can of Raid on that one single cockroach, and it was very satisfying to watch that cockroach die. But did I do anything to solve the cockroach problem? Not at all. I just exposed myself to a lot of chemicals and killed one single cockroach. So the idea that we can just spray a pesticide and solve the problem is the mindset that we're trying to change. So you'll hear me say pest management professional instead of exterminator. I know it's going to be rather hard for us to change this term at NYCHA, and I'm not advocating that we should, but I just want to let you know that I'm going to say pest control technician, management professional, because that implies that somebody has some technical knowledge. They're going to manage the issues. They're not just going to come in with a backpack sprayer and exterminate everything and kill everything. That's just not realistic. So I'm going to challenge you to think a little bit differently about how we manage pests. What we want to transition to is a good IPM program. IPM is essentially using multiple approaches to fight a pest, and the term management implies we're trying to use the most economical means with the least possible risk to people, property, and the environment. So we stole the IPM term from agriculture, but when we adapt it to using in structures, it always starts with inspecting and monitoring and correctly identifying the pest. I always use the example of office I worked in where I thought I had a mouse problem. I set a mouse trap, and the next day I came in and I had to deal with a very angry rat with a head wound who was just walking in circles. So knowing the right pest can help you, correctly identifying the pest can help you apply the correct control for that pest. And that's especially important with bed bugs. A lot of misidentification with bed bugs. And knowing whether we have rats or mice is especially relevant too. And then we want to scale the response. So there's a different response for one cockroach found as opposed to 57 billion cockroaches. You're going to use different techniques. And then we always want to use multiple tools. The tool that you'll hear most often me talk about as a great tool is a vacuum for pest control. Vacuums can eliminate almost as many cockroaches as pesticides, and they have the added benefit of taking the dead bodies and shed skins out of the environment. And we'll talk about why that's important. And then the piece that I think a lot of people miss with IPM is the evaluate success piece. So is it working? Are we going to keep applying the same technique if it's not working? We shouldn't be, and there should be somebody keeping an eye out on the pest control records. And I think that's a big role that your prevention and intervention strategies department is going to play, is to kind of evaluate, is this working? Are we having repeat offenders? What can we do differently? And then we're all the way back to inspecting and monitoring. The big difference here with this way of pest control is it's more proactive, because we're inspecting and monitoring. We're hopefully finding those pest issues earlier rather than later when they've turned into a big infestation. So this is proactive as opposed to a reactive pest control program, which is more like replying to complaints, complaint-based pest control. And this might be one of those slides that you think is kind of oversimplified for your purposes, but you get the idea that everybody has a little bit of a role to play. Some roles are bigger than others. The resident has a huge role, the pest management professional, the property manager, resident support services, your procurement specialist, whoever's buying the supplies, the maintenance crew, landscaping services, and your janitorial or custodial staff. So all your trades. I know you have several other trades that are not listed here, but everybody can play a role. You'll see in the middle of my diagram, I have IPM coordinator. Some sites that I've worked with have named an IPM coordinator, someone that kind of oversees all the efforts, whether that's building-wide or whether that's housing authority-wide. They're keeping an eye on things, making sure the resources are dedicated to the worst infestations first, and they're doing some of the troubleshooting. This person could be the property manager, it could be someone at the administration level, and the Boston Housing Authority actually has used tenants as IPM coordinators to work with residents more. So it's just helpful to have somebody who's kind of overseeing all the efforts, and I think that's what your prevention and intervention strategies office is going to be, the role that they're going to be playing. So IPM when applied can give you cost savings over time. So often at the beginning of an IPM, implementing IPM, there's some additional costs and time that have to be dedicated to pest control, but the goal is over time, those costs are going to go down, and you're going to be spending less money and less time on pest control. Also, you'll gain a healthier building, fewer asthma attacks, less exposure to pesticides, and less of a chance that you're going to be bringing those pests home with you. So it's to everybody's advantage. Fewer complaints from residents, that's a big one. The Boston Housing Authority, a development at the Boston Housing Authority, reduced cockroach orders by 68% after 1 year of IPM. So that's a really good example of IPM in action. And the Boston Housing Authority is our poster child for IPM. They have a lot of good resources, and they've been doing IPM for a long time. So if you are curious about how they do things at the Boston Housing Authority, go ahead and visit their website. They have a lot online that you can gain from. They also have done a lot of work with hoarding and hoarding interventions. So there's some resources on my website and on the Boston Housing Authority website for working with residents with hoarding. I'm going a little off track, but and then ultimately the goal is fewer pests, and that can slow down some of these and lessen the number of infestations that you have. So what does HUD say about pest control? Well, in most cases, they can only really give us some guidance. They have the REAC inspections, of course, where they're looking, where the inspectors are looking for pest infestations. There's some flaws with that REAC assessment, with the REAC inspections, and I recently submitted comments to HUD. My biggest problem is you lose the same amount of points for one cockroach as you would for 50 zillion. So we want them to grade infestations a little bit more. Anyway, so we have the REAC inspection process where you could get in trouble for having pest infestations, but also HUD issues these guidances or notices periodically, and they're really good guides to establish a policy or look to make sure you're in compliance. They are not enforced. But as I have had conversations and learned from one of the most prominent bedbug lawyers in the country, he has represented tenants of housing authorities, and when a case comes before a judge, the judge looks at those notices and uses them as guides and rules that, and if the housing authority is in violation, he's going to side with the tenants. So God forbid there's some liability issues or tenants decide to sue, you should be aware of those notices and hopefully in compliance with them, but not just to protect yourself, but also because there's good advice in there. So I pulled out two quotes that I thought were most helpful, but I certainly encourage you to look up the notices at HUD.gov to get a more complete picture of what is in the promotion of integrated pest management. and the guidelines on bed bug control and prevention in public housing. So the two quotes that I picked out, I want you to think about as you as it applies to where you work, and see, just think about if you're in compliance with them. So IPM efforts must involve the PHA staff, contractors, residents, and include establishing an ongoing monitoring and record-keeping system for regular sampling and assessment of pests, surveillance techniques, and remedial actions taken, including establishing an assessment criteria for program effectiveness. So record-keeping and overseeing those records. And the guidelines for bed bug control and prevention in public housing, the quote that I pulled out from that is, within 24 hours of a tenant report, the PHA should make contact with the tenant, provide the tenant with information about control and prevention of bed bugs, and discuss measures the tenant may be able to take in the unit before the inspection is performed. Inspection should take place within 3 business days of the tenant complaint. The PHA may not charge the tenant. So I'm just wanted to read you those quotes to make sure you are aware that, you know, HUD does have something to say, and it encourages you guys to follow these guidelines. And so that's 24 hours within the tenant complaint. I know that's challenging, and the 3 business days for inspection. So what role do we play in, do non-extermination staff play in pest control? One of the biggest roles we can play is the documentation and the oversight. I want to encourage you to think about, does this happen in your building? Does this happen in your development? Does someone review the pest control records periodically to look for those treatment failures? And who troubleshoots those treatment failures? Are we just relying on the extermination crew who are, you know, stretched pretty thin? Or do we get involved? Do you meet with your pest control technicians or their supervisors periodically to discuss those treatment failures or the problem units? And who keeps track of the follow-up inspections after the treatments? How do we know that the problem is really gone? And I know that your Maximo system is being upgraded or changed at this point to automatically set up follow-up inspections and treatments, which is great, because pest infestations are rarely completely eliminated with just one treatment. There has to be follow-up inspections and, of course, treatments. And then who works with the residents when they are non-compliant? Either they can't, they're physically unable to prepare their apartments for treatments, or they're physically unable to deal with clutter, or they just simply won't. So there's, you know, 2 avenues there you have to be prepared to address. I know you guys have the Maximo system, and you're not often seeing these pest control records, or not everybody does, but I use this as an example, and you can see I've been using it since 2015 as a good example of something I see really often is we keep records, sure, because we're required, but no one ever looks at those records to find out that, oh boy, Mr. Smith in Unit 808 has had 11 treatments for bed bugs, and on July 27th, the next scheduled treatment is already scheduled. So clearly they have not eliminated the bed bugs, and this poor person is being exposed to chemical applications over and over and over, and doesn't seem to be helping. So I encourage you to find the cases like this and work with those trouble spots, and I call them the focus units, to try to put the time and the effort into figuring out what's going wrong here. Are we just applying chemicals and that's not an effective control? Is the resident, is the apartment too cluttered? Are they reintroducing them? There could be several reasons why that treatment is failing, and it's not always the resident's fault. And then I have my Einstein quote: the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's often what we do with pest control. We keep applying the same pesticides, expecting them to work, and they don't. So while most of you are not applying the pesticides, it is helpful to understand and know a little bit about pesticide applications. Pesticides should only be applied by licensed technicians, and there's applicators and there's technicians, and they all go through specific training, and they know that the label is actually the law, and they have to have that label practically memorized before they apply any chemicals. So we should leave the pesticide applications to the experts. Also, something I think a lot of people don't know about pesticides is the EPA puts a label on something that doesn't necessarily mean it works really well. They do not test efficacy. They do not test if it works well. They are more concerned with the risks involved, the toxicity of a product before it gets put on the market. So don't be fooled by products that are labeled in the store that they will kill bed bugs, because most of them have only been tested in a lab where you practically have to drown a bug to kill them. We have concerns with pesticides. A big one that you guys probably know is that pests become tolerant or avoid pesticides after a while. We keep using the same pesticides, they'd stop working because the bugs have some genetic ability to either avoid or not die from that pesticide. And those that have that ability are the ones that go on to reproduce. So the next generation is even more resistant to pesticides. And sometimes the risks from pesticides may outweigh the benefit. And of course, there's possible risks to people, pets, and wildlife. And there's certain populations that are especially vulnerable or sensitive to some pesticides, including elderly people, children, pregnant women. Think about babies crawling around on the floor and the pesticides that we apply onto the floor for cockroaches, for example. And then people with breathing or lung disorders such as asthma, it's a double-edged sword. They're getting symptoms from the pests and the pesticides themselves. And then of course there's people with chemical sensitivities we have to be aware of. So the risks from pesticide aren't necessarily all about how toxic it is. It's how much we are exposed to them. So with IPM, we're not saying don't use pesticides at all, but think about how we apply pesticides and how we use pesticides to reduce that risk. We want to limit the number of applications, so we want those applications to be really effective when we do use chemicals. For example, if you think about rodenticides, the size of a rat is much bigger than the size of a bug, so therefore the pesticide used to kill the rat is much more toxic than the pesticide used to kill a bug. But they're on our less risky ends of the spectrum because their rodenticides are put in tamper-resistant bait stations. So our children and our residents and me and you will never be exposed to the rodenticide because we're not going to open up that bait station, and we can't open up that bait station. So there's no exposure, but that's a very toxic pesticide. And the same thing with gel baits in crevices. The gel baits for cockroaches have the same chemicals that sprays have, but they're applied in a way that they just reach the cockroaches rather than broadcasted all over, the cabinets and the floors. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the total release foggers or the bug bombs. Well, those are over-the-counter products that aren't as toxic as some of the restricted use pesticides that your exterminators use, but because of the exposure, they become more risky. Bug bombs put, pesticides all over the place. We should also be aware of the illegal and risky pesticides that you might come in contact with or your residents may be using. And this is, especially likely in New York City, where we can get these things on the street corners and at little markets. So be aware that there are illegal products out there, and you might consider looking for some of these products to your housekeeping inspection checklist. The pesticides that I put up on the screen are especially dangerous for children because the Chinese chalk can look like just regular chalk, and especially if you don't understand Chinese, you're not going to know that that's a pesticide. And then the mothballs, the colored mothballs especially, looking like candy, and tres pasitos looks like granola. So there's risks of exposure, and these are actually illegal products. So it's a good education opportunity with your residents if you do see people using these products. And I know it can be really hard to tell residents not to use pesticides because, as this picture shows, they're right in the grocery aisle next to the Barbies, and people are used to just picking up that can of Raid when they have cockroaches. A better option is the upper shelves where they have the bait stations for cockroaches. So if your residents really need to do something, really want to be proactive, encourage them to buy their own bait stations for cockroaches. And none of these products really work for bed bugs that are in this picture. So total release foggers or bug bombs, as I said, they put pesticides everywhere where the pests aren't. They put them on the floor, the couches, the counters, and so generally we're just you know, exposing ourselves, but not the pesticides that are hiding. And these chemicals just aren't, the bugs are resistant to the chemicals in these bug bombs, and the fact that they're pretty dangerous. One of these pictures, the headline of the story was, or the byline of the story was, and cockroaches were seen crawling over the rubble. So they're pretty dangerous. People light off 6 at a time. They leave their pilot light on, and there could be an explosion. So why do people tolerate exposure to pests and pesticides? You know, there seems to be two ends of the spectrum. The people that are horrified when pesticides are applied, or other people who feel like the technicians did nothing if they don't apply pesticides. So people get, why do they live with pests? Well, people get accustomed to living with the problems. If you've been raised for generation after generation in apartments that have cockroaches, that's going to become, you know, part of your normal day-to-day life. People have low standards for pest control and maintenance. Maybe they don't think like it's worth it to call in a complaint. A lot of people have other priorities and they're too busy. They don't see the pests coming out because the pests come out at night, and they're just have other things on their mind. In most places where I visit, I'm working most of the time with elderly and disabled housing, and I'd say 9 times out of 10 they don't even know they have bed bugs. Maybe not that many, but a significant number of apartments I go in and do bed bug inspections in, I find that the resident has no idea that they have bed bugs because they can't see them and they're not reacting to the bites. And then some people sadly cannot envision a better way, so hopefully people get inspired, and this gives them a little bit of faith that they can live without pests. So we're going to get into cockroaches now a little bit, and we're going to talk about your role, the resident's role, and the PMP or the exterminator's role. The big cockroach that we worry about, not the big one, but the most common cockroach we worry about that infests our kitchens and our homes is the German cockroach. But certainly you also will see American and Oriental cockroaches that will enter into our basements from the sewers and into the lower level floors. And those are a concern too, but the most common cockroach you'll see in people's homes is the German cockroach. Those American cockroaches sometimes we call water bugs. Cockroaches, of course, are health hazards, as I mentioned. The cockroach bodies, their shed skins, and their frass, which is a fancy word entomologists use for poop, both of them can make asthma worse in sensitive people. They can cause asthma in preschool age children. They aggravate allergies. They can contaminate food, dishes, and counters. Think about the two places cockroaches visit most often, our bathrooms and our kitchens. So they're transferring the germs from the bathrooms to kitchens pretty frequently. So we have to be aware that the dead cockroaches, the skins and the frass have to be cleaned up, whether that's the resident's role, whether the resident can do it. That's a challenge that we face. But the exterminators are going to be equipped with vacuums, so at least they will be able to remove live cockroaches, dead cockroaches, and their skins. And that is a good step in the right direction, because I know a lot of residents don't even have a vacuum and are not able to clean up. So does killing one cockroach really make a difference? Yes, it does. So a cockroach carries around that egg case with about 40 babies in it, and they hatch out, and maybe 20 of those are females. They go on to reproduce, and lo and behold, by June, we have 18,400 cockroaches just from that one pregnant female. So yes, killing one cockroach does make a difference, but that myth about don't step on a cockroach is true. German cockroaches have sticky egg cases, so it is possible that if you stepped on a pregnant or a female carrying around an egg case, that egg case would stick to you. So I encourage you, kill the cockroach, but check the bottom of your shoe. So we should all know that by now where cockroaches tend to live, near warmth, near food, in cracks and crevices where their bodies can touch the bottom and the top of the little holes that they're in. This is important to know because this is why pesticides don't always work. We can't reach those cockroaches that are hiding in the walls and hiding in those cracks and crevices. So residents and staff should all be looking out for these, for cockroaches in homes, especially around the stove, the refrigerator, and the sinks. What do cockroaches eat? This is really important to make this point that why we can't really blame the residents for cockroach issues, why the resident not being the best housekeeper isn't always the reason why we have cockroach problems. They eat anything. One drop of grease can feed 20 cockroaches for a full day, or one cockroach for 20 days. So think about your own home. I think about this a lot. I leave dishes in the sink sometimes. I have, I'm sure there's drops of grease that have fallen. I'm sure if I picked up my garbage bag, I'd find some gunk on the bottom of my garbage can. It is nearly impossible to remove every last bit of food for cockroaches. Does it help when people are clean? Yes, they have less to eat. Certainly it's going to help. But just because somebody is messy does not mean that treatment should be denied, because bait will work whether it's a clean apartment or whether it's a unsanitary apartment. They will still eat the bait because they eat anything, even cardboard glue, and you can still gain control with enough bait even when there's a competing food source. Well, whose role should it be to clean? Well, we know the resident needs some help with that. Some people don't even know how to clean. And what do you do when the residents can't clean? What is the contingency plan when we have disabled or elderly residents who cannot clean? And later on, and maybe in early 2020, we'll be hopefully hosting another webinar for those that it's relevant for on how to work with residents. And I don't have all the solutions, but we can kind of hash out what's been working and think creatively. And what about water? Cockroaches can live for a while without food, but they cannot survive without water for, I think, about a week. So removing those leaky pipes or fixing leaky pipes and removing the water sources are really important. And you can see from my list, there's all sorts of places where cockroaches will find water. So whose role is it to remove the water source? It really depends. I always try to use this rule of thumb to say if it's property of the housing authority, like the pipes, the faulty appliance, a leaky refrigerator, then yeah, it is it should be a maintenance issue. But if it's the resident leaving water out for their pet bowls, then that's their responsibility to pick that up at night. And that's an education opportunity right there. Good sanitation can mean a thorough stove cleaning. I see so many apartments where the stove is really the heart of the pest issue with cockroaches and rodents, mostly mice. I know it is not realistic for us to expect that every resident is going to clean their stove like this, but I know that a lot of residents, and when I go into apartments, especially when I'm doing inspections for mice, first thing I do is lift up that top part of the stove, and residents tell me, I didn't know that lifted up, and that's a whole big source of food for them as the food drops down under that plate, that top plate. So we can think about how we can convey that message to residents that this will help. If you can clean under that stove periodically, you're going to eliminate a lot of food. If you can give them orientation, part of their orientation as they sign their lease. There's also IPM intervention for families with asthma. I wrote a question mark because I wasn't sure how that was happening in New York City anymore, but Josie gave me a note, said that for asthma there are DOH, MH commissioner orders that we follow up on. So that sounds like to me that there are some opportunities. Sorry, Josie. There are some opportunities for IPM intervention with families and with families with asthma. So that's another opportunity to get them some cleaning classes and orientation. So we have cockroaches. Now what do we do? Well, hopefully the residents cleaning up the food and dishes and limiting the food sources, but most of all, we really want them to report when they have cockroaches so that problem can be taken care of and does not spread to a neighboring unit. And they should be aware that they won't be charged for those services. And I know very well that people will not report, and that's why we have the big change will be proactive inspections happening and using these sticky trap monitors, hopefully, in many units. Well, for staff, what are the responsibilities? Reporting when you see them in common areas, in hallways, and in people's homes. We want to monitor the residents' compliance with their role. And intervene when treatment fails. Notice the patterns. Are we seeing treatment failure in apartments that are all generally right next to the trash chute? Then, report that, and something has to be done. Obviously the trash chute needs to be cleaned and treated as well. So the exterminators, or the PMPs, their role is to use solutions that provide the most effective prevention and control, the least risk to residents and staff. We want them to monitor, and depending on how severe the infestation is, that automatic follow-up that will be generated by Maximo should happen within 1 to 4 weeks with an inspection and treatment if it's necessary. Every week is a little hopeful, but that would be ideal. Every 2 weeks for heavy infestations would be okay, and possibly every 4 weeks for a mid to lower level cockroach infestation. But infestations are very rarely controlled in one treatment. Everybody should be looking, trash chute, boiler room, think like a cockroach, look in the hidden areas, use a flashlight, think about where they would find food and water. Monitors tell us a lot. I think that there's going to be a push to be using monitors for cockroaches. These are essentially little sticky traps that go under your sink and in the bathroom. And in my picture here, I'll tell you, we learned a lot from this one apartment. The 3 traps on the left came from the kitchen, and the third from the left came from the bathroom, and the other 3 were in the bedroom and living room. So you can see they're not really eating too much in their bedroom and living room. There might be one little nymph on one of those traps. So now we know the control measures have to focus on those rooms, the kitchen and the bathroom. We can also tell that on the first trap you see on the left, that the direction of the cockroaches, where they're traveling from. Well, they're traveling from somewhere that was to the left, so you can use that as a tool. The exterminators can use that as a tool to figure out where we're going to be applying the baits. If they're over in this area, then we're going to apply baits where they are. And monitors will also tell us if an infestation is gone. So we change those monitors after treatment, and we go back in 2 weeks and we look at the monitors again. We still have cockroaches, we treat again. If there's no cockroaches on those monitors, then we can say, yes, we have eliminated this infestation. So they're very valuable tools. And I encourage you all, when you're in an apartment, for whatever reason, maintenance or whatnot, if you have the opportunity, take a peek at those monitors. Everyone can be the eyes and ears of pest control. Maintenance role is mainly going to be exclusion. Remember I said that cockroaches like to be in those little tiny cracks and crevices? Well, we can do a lot with silicone caulk, copper mesh, screens, door sweeps, always on the boiler rooms and exterior doors especially. And the PMP's role is the treatment itself. So ideally there's sanitation first, but baits will still work even with bad sanitation. They won't work as fast and they won't work as well, but they will work. We want them to monitor and inspect and then figure out where the bait needs to be placed and how much and where to apply. Only licensed individuals should be applying pesticides, as I mentioned. Baits are the most effective pesticide option because the cockroaches, the poison that is in a bait is actually the same types of poisons that are in sprays, except it goes directly to the cockroach. So the cockroach feeds on the bait, doesn't die immediately, goes back to those hiding spots where we can't access in the walls, in the cabinet voids, in the cracks and crevices. And that's where a lot of the baby cockroaches just spend all of their time waiting for the adults to feed them. And cockroaches are gross, so the baby cockroaches stay safe in their hiding places, and they feed on the dead bodies of cockroaches and the frass, or the poop, now that you know that fancy word. So when they feed on the poop and the dead bodies, they actually get poisoned themselves. So I read somewhere for every one cockroach that eats the bait, about 30 more are poisoned. So it may take a little longer, and you may get residents that are demanding, where's the spray? But it's an education opportunity to let them know these baits are safer and they do work, but they will take a little bit of time. And the gel baits that the professionals use come in tubes, but residents can always buy their own, or you can buy your own bait station at the hardware store or grocery store. So they work best when they're the only food. They also can get contaminated with sprays and scented cleaners, also with tobacco use. Also, there are dusts available for cockroaches. Boric acid is one of the oldest pesticides we have, and it's one of the few pesticides that cockroaches have not developed a resistance to, miraculously. So these dusts are good because they stay active for as long as they stay dry. But as my picture shows on the right-hand side, that's not the way to apply them. Just like me or you, we wouldn't walk through a pile of snow. Cockroach isn't going to walk through a pile of dust. So they have to be applied by professionals who have special equipment, and they shouldn't be applied just out in the open. These are more tools for cabinet voids, wall voids, and out of the way places where people won't be breathing them in. Unit turnover is an ideal time to apply these dusts, where you can access some of the spaces that are out of the way, and then they don't have to be applied again. As long as they stay dry, they will stay active. The other cockroach control we have is insect growth regulators. Sorry, my picture's fuzzy, but you get the picture. This kind of makes these distorted, weird-looking cockroaches because it's interfering with their hormones. Takes a long time to work. Well, the advantages of insect growth regulators, or IGRs, is we don't have insect hormones in us, so they're very low toxic for us. And those are the exception. When I say no sprays, IGRs sometimes come in a spray, sometimes come in the bait method. And they're very compatible with baits. We just don't want our residents to, your residents to be spraying cockroach spray or using foggers, because those can push the cockroaches further into hiding and make the professional's job a lot harder. And we finished cockroaches. On to rodents. Your role, the resident's role, the PMP's role. Rodents are big health hazards. They carry infectious diseases. I mentioned the asthma. They bite. They damage food and property. They chew on wires because they resemble grass, and their instinct is to chew on grass to access the seeds on top of grass. So that's why they're a fire hazard, because they're chewing on those wires. And they're just gross, right? So everyone should know the signs of rodents: sightings, the noise, the gnaw marks, the holes, the nests, the rat burrows, droppings, dog or cat alerts. Sometimes our dogs and cats tell us when we have a rodent infestation. Rub marks, indicator pests, and smell. So I'll show you some of these pictures, but you should all be familiar with them because we don't often see the actual rodents that cause these, but we can certainly, they leave their calling cards. So the droppings, this is a bad infestation on the right, but it's not uncommon to see this in affordable housing where I work. And I'm sure you guys have seen apartments like this too. This is a big problem with all these mouse droppings on the ground, especially when there's children around. The ceiling tiles, I don't think I mentioned, but mice will dribble urine everywhere they go, and that is also an allergen and a cause of asthma. They leave these little trails, and rats will actually mostly go to the bathroom in one spot. So something to note is when you see a stain in a ceiling tile like this, might be a leak. It needs attention regardless, but it also could be a sign of rat infestation as well. The sites that I see most often are these chew holes and the rub marks associated with a bad infestation. That's an apartment that those mice have been using that hole for a very long time, very comfortably, and they leave behind that smudge from the oil on their fur. This particular apartment had both rats and mice in it, so that myth that they either one or the other exists, they can't exist together, is not true. That apartment had them both. So the holes are the big sign, then the big push that you're going to see NYCHA try to be fixing. Killing one mouse, setting that trap and killing that one mouse does do a lot. This is, I know, something that we all deal with in our homes. So just know that you're making progress. If you kill one mouse, that one mouse, pregnant mouse, by the next year can be 4,500 mice. So you can see why they infest buildings so intensely, so quickly. And I've been in so many buildings that have had mice endemic for years and years, and that's where the real challenges are, because that population has been allowed to build up for so long. So ideally we prevent that from happening, but there is some catching up to do. So everyone should report. We should figure out, well, the professionals are going to have to figure out if it's a mouse or a rat. Sometimes it could be difficult. Location, the date where we saw it, how many, if there an obvious food source, what action was taken, and follow up. And a lot of that is going to be done in your Maximo system. How do rodents get in? This is something we should all be looking for, is these holes in the exteriors of buildings, especially in the fall as the weather starts to turn. So the rodents outside are going to try to push their way into buildings. Some buildings just have native mouse populations and rat populations already within the building, breeding happily for years. But exclusion efforts should be really pushed to get exclusion done over the summer, so you can avoid that that infiltration of rodents in the fall, when they tend to really push into buildings. So mice rarely travel more than 10 feet from their nest for food. So note that if you're seeing mice, they're probably reproducing and breeding inside. So you're on the right track to finding them. So whose job is it to fill the gaps? That's going to be a combination of your specialized trades, your maintenance folks, and your extermination crew. We should be looking for holes around pipes, and everyone could be doing this, spotting these holes, and especially under doors, and that gap between doors is called the astragal gap, and they make products to fill those gaps. And they make, you can see my picture on the right is the excluder line is, it's not just rubber door sweeps, but they have metal mesh ingrained in them, so they can't be chewed through. So pay special attention to your doors. Josie wrote me the note that door sweeps are on Oracle, and the door sweep team is installing 2 per stair hall, focusing on basement doors and compactor, trash compactor rooms. If you need to buy more sweeps, and you can, and install these where they're needed. So this is a big push, clearly, that you guys are trying to address. When I did Bobby Corrigan's Rodent Academy, we walked around New York City, and he had us looking at doors all over the place and noting all the doors that had gaps, especially in restaurants. And after I took that course with him, I never wanted to eat at another restaurant again, because once you start looking, you're going to see these gaps. And a mouse can fit through a hole the size of a dime, and a rat can fit through a hole the size of a quarter. So some of these gaps we have in our doors need to be sealed. I worked in a building a year or 2 ago where they had rats in the building, and I walked around the building looking for all these cracks and holes, and lo and behold, the doorway that was closest to the trash compactor room was propped open. So sometimes it's an easy fix. You just got to close the doors. Once inside, they tend to live near heat. These baseboard heaters are a huge problem, and they allow the mice to travel from unit to unit. So be careful when looking for mice around the baseboard heaters. In the picture on the right, you can see how well that glue board's doing. It's not doing anything, but there's those calling cards that the mice leave for us to let us know they're living pretty happily and warmly in that baseboard heater. Always check the stoves. My gosh, I can't stress this enough. This guy's apartment, he looked like he either was one of the cleanest people or he never used his stove. But when I lifted it up, that is not burnt food under there. Those are all mouse droppings. So mice can really establish themselves in stoves and never have to leave because they have the warmth and the food right there. And here's a view of another stove underneath where when I pulled out the broiler drawer. This is a good sign that there are mice very happily living in this stove and probably not traveling very far outside that stove area. We see the insulation has been pulled out and some glue boards, again, not really doing much. And then a nice attempt to seal those openings with that foam, but even that rodent-proof foam that they advertise is just mint oil in that foam, and it really doesn't seal things for very long. If mice are determined, they'll chew right through it. They don't care that it's minty. They're like, oh, fresh breath. So the other places to look for mice entryways and seal up, and here's a couple attempts that people have made to seal up those entries. It could be better. I'll show you on my next slide a better way, but some steel wool and some metal mesh to seal up those holes. And the picture on the bottom is an escutcheon plate around the pipe that was installed, but it's not the right size. And then the picture on the top right is an escutcheon plate again, excuse me, that's just not connected to the wall. So they have to be sealed and connected to the wall like the picture I'm showing now. I also, when I do programs for residents, I give them these little copper scrubbies as just a tool that's cheap that I can provide that they can stuff holes with, because copper and other metal meshes work well because the mice can't chew through them. Your tradespeople, the maintenance folks and the exterminators, might have a big roll of this copper stuff-it material or something similar, maybe not copper, but you get the picture. So this big roll can be stuffed in those little gaps, and I have a blurry picture, but this guy is pushing the copper mesh into that pipe hole, and then he's applying the caulk around it to hold it in place. All right, rats. This is not a New York City rat. This is a Kansas City rat, but they breed them big there too. Usually rat burrows are outside. Sometimes they get into our basements and crawl spaces and end up living inside, but pretty often they're outside, and that's why addressing those outdoor burrows is really important, because they will try to push in for if there's food and there's warmth. So the trick with rats always is the trash issue and making sure we're not feeding them. In New York City, there's a big problem with our trash collecting system, because the bags of trash are set out on the sidewalks to be collected, and at night it is just a buffet for rats. So New York has some challenges in that respect, because we don't have a good way to pick up trash other than leaving it out on the curb. But for your purposes, you're going to look at your trash collection purposes within your building and outside the building, and pay close attention to those areas that we are having rats come in, and is there an association with garbage. So here's our familiar picture, I'm sure to all you, of rat burrows. And can you guess what's behind the fence? Well, that's the dumpster, of course. So I think it's funny they put this, the good try on the rodent bait station right next to there, but if I were a rat, I'd probably be entering that dumpster for the delicious bacon grease that somebody threw out, rather than going to and eat maybe some bitter rodenticide. So we have to address the dumpsters and the trash issues. We should be making sure all your dumpsters don't have holes in the bottom, that they're getting emptied frequently enough so they're not overflowing, and hopefully they are on paved surfaces so rats cannot burrow under them. And ideally they're closed, but I know a lot of places I've worked, they want to keep the dumpsters open so the kids can go take out the garbage and throw it out. So we will, do what you can as far as trash removal, but just make sure that you're not having holes and overflowing trash regularly. Our landscaping and grounds crews, I think you've already got some of this training, but we want to avoid shapes of shrubs and vegetation where rats can seek shelter and hide under. Yeah, we just don't want to give them a lot of places to hide, and we don't want those trees or shrubs to be touching the building and giving pests a runway. Traps are really effective, but there are some challenges with traps. When you leave out traps, somebody has to be there. The professional has to go in and collect those traps and remove the dead animals from them, but they still are a really good means of control. That is something you guys will have to work through, whether you use traps and what the process will be for collecting traps. But for your own homes, as we all, I'm sure, have had, I've had mice in my house, and it's just good to know that traps still work, and the placement is really important. You want to place the bait side against the wall because mice and rats always travel along walls. They're not going to run out into the middle of the room. So we place those traps where the rats and the mice are. And this was really easy placement because you can see that little chew hole where the mice have been coming in and out. So we look at where they are, what their habits are, and we place the traps near them. The picture on the top right is a Good Nature A24. I've heard that it's a good trap maybe for some basement areas or common areas where you're getting rats, because you can set it and it not have to worry except to collect the rats. But you set it and essentially the rats climb up in there, stick their head up in there to get the bait, and it has a little cartridge, CO2 cartridge, and it creates pressure, and essentially they get bonked on the head when they go in to get the bait, and it's a quick death. And there are several other traps too, but we don't have time to get into all of them. I do want to mention glue boards are pretty ineffective, especially for rats. This is a picture of a rat just peeled himself right off that glue board and worked on chewing it a little bit too. But for mice, we do catch juvenile mice. We don't catch adult mice very often in these glue boards, but this is kind of sad for the residents to have to deal with that little baby mouse. Kind of looks cute, and they might be disturbed by the sounds that mice make when they do get caught on glue boards. They don't go quietly. But generally they only catch babies, and that's going to tell you, and it's not helpful to control the population because the adults will just keep having more babies, but they will tell you that there is a nest around, because the baby mice rarely travel very far from the nest, just a couple feet. So your professionals are using targeted chemical applications. They're using dry ice in burrows at least 10 feet away from the buildings, and they're using bait stations, and this has to be done by professionals. Do want to say that placing bait stations outside of a building will do nothing to control the rodent infestation indoors, no matter how many you place. And then the residents' role, of course, this is our challenge. I recognize that, is the sanitation, because would you eat this blue bitter bait when you can have this nice hot dog dinner that somebody left out for you on the stove? Probably not. So that's another education opportunity that we have to share with residents, that sanitation is important when they have an infestation. I'm especially concerned with cleaning up of droppings, and one of my missions is to create a picture-based guide for residents with the CDC recommendations on it, something everybody can understand, because this is where people can get sick when they clean up droppings. They have to be, especially for your folks, the custodial staff and other folks who will be encountering mouse droppings and rat droppings, they should be disinfected first sprayed down with a disinfectant, let be, and then wiped up. Vacuuming up mouse droppings can send, and rat droppings can send the pathogens into the air. So just to review, sanitation is the residents and the janitorial staff. Hopefully we're eliminating food and not making our buildings so enticing to rodents. I know that's not 100% possible. And exclusion, traps, and rodenticides as our last resort. I'm going to try to breeze through bed bugs in record time because it's already after 3, and I know a lot of you are probably pretty familiar with bed bugs and what they look like. So most of you have been at the forefront of the insurgence of bed bugs since the early 2000s or maybe late 90s when they first came back to the United States or started to resurface again. New York really was the ground zero. So why are they back? Well, it has a lot to do with mobility and people's travel habits and also pesticide resistance. And unfortunately, they've become the bigger problem for affordable housing because people with money can afford to pay for them to be treated, but it's very expensive, obviously, to get treatment for bed bugs. And we rely on the sprays. The sprays don't work. People say bring back DDT, but within a few years of us using DDT, before it was banned, the bed bugs were already resistant to DDT. So even if we could bring it back, it wouldn't work. So we need more pesticides to do the same job, but your pest control technicians should be switching products back and forth so we don't create this resistance problem. Here are some facts about bug biology. The only thing I think I want to mention here is just a point of interest and gets people's attention is the mating strategy of bed bugs is kind of weird. They practice something called traumatic insemination. So this is one of the theories that why bed bugs spread and they're so hard to control is because the female or the male pokes a hole in the female's abdomen to inseminate her, and then she's got all the sperm she needs for a lifetime of egg laying, and she lays a couple eggs every day as she wanders around. But if you think about it, does the female want to get another hole in her abdomen, or does she want to be mated with repeatedly? Probably not, because she could die from too many matings, too many traumatic inseminations, appropriately named. And so she's going to maybe not want to hang out with the rest of the bed bugs and travel around and find some place alone. As she travels around, she lays eggs. So that's a challenge to control bed bugs because they spread out so quickly. Everyone should know what bed bugs look like by now, and your residents should know what they look like because they can look pretty different between being fed and not recently fed. From the time they start feeding to the time they finish feeding, they can look like two different bugs. We all know they are active at night, mostly active at night. If you work at night and sleep during the day, they're going to switch their behavior. You guys walking into apartments should be assured that most of the time bed bugs are going to be hiding during the day while you're in apartments, and they're not going to jump out and crawl on you unless you're sitting down for a really long time for 30 minutes or more on an upholstered surface where they're hiding. They don't want to come out and when there's a lot of action happening. They can't fly, jump, or burrow into your skin, and they mainly hitchhike on coats, bags, furniture, and wheelchairs, and they do not infest pets like fleas. Don't be confused. There's a lot of pests that we often confuse with bed bugs, and I think my number one is the carpet beetle and their larvae because they're often found in the same places, so proper identification by your professionals. Bed bugs are not a public health threat. They're a pest of public health significance. They don't spread any disease under normal living conditions, but they certainly can cause secondary infections. They're especially concerning for people with diabetes who don't recover from these infections. And of course, they result in the stress, the loss of work, financial burden, and so on. So everyone, including residents, should be aware of the signs, and it's worth it maybe to have a class with residents. So the bites, are often the first sign we have bed bugs, but we can't diagnose them by bites alone. The fecal spots, that's that spotting on the sheets that you see, looks like a little Sharpie marker. The shed skins that they leave behind, I breezed over biology, but they shed skins about 5 times in their lives, so they're going to leave behind a lot of shed skins. And dead bed bugs and live bed bugs are often the last thing we see because they're very reclusive. They're hiding during the day. They only come out at night when we're asleep. So everyone should look for the signs, and this mattress piping is a good place to start. I always search the mattress piping when I travel to hotels. It's the easiest place to look and the most likely place you'll find them. But other places, they're going to be on stuffed animals. They're going to be on your mattresses, on couch cushions, and they get in that zipper. You're in big trouble. And they also can fit anywhere where you can fit a credit card. So that means they can get behind those outlet plates and get into the walls. And that's often how we find them spreading from apartment to apartment. Under doors especially too. I always see a pattern where if one apartment is infested, I go across the hall and that apartment has an infestation too. It's an easy passage. So they can come in on anything. They can come through the walls. They can come in on anything that we buy secondhand or discarded furniture especially. Introductions are more likely where people travel, where they set their belongings down, where they can easily crawl, or where they can feed on someone for 5 minutes without being detected. So our role, management's role, is developing a proactive program and not relying on complaints. Many people don't report because they're afraid they're going to be charged or denied residency or evicted. They're embarrassed to complain. They're unaware of the signs. And a lot of people do not react to the bites. I think I mentioned earlier, I walk into so many apartments that have bed bugs, but the resident doesn't know. In a recent Rutgers study that Cheng Luang did in a couple New Jersey housing authorities, he found the managers were unaware of almost 70% of the infestations that they had because they rely on residents to complain. So another approach is to be more proactive with inspections and monitoring. So why do we care about catching those infestations early? Because early on, it only takes a couple treatments to control a bed bug infestation because they're all around the bed and the sleeping area. Further along in an infestation, they move away from the bed and they're going to be a lot harder to control, and you're going to need maybe 5 or more chemical treatments. So we definitely want the professional pest control technicians to inspect, but something to think about is, do you want to train some staff to also do those inspections? You can think about hiring a canine detection, but definitely talk to me about the pros and cons of that route before you hire a canine handler. And then if bed bugs are found, we always want to inspect and place monitors in the adjacent units and across the hall. Suggested inspection schedule for buildings with history of pests, you want to inspect quarterly. I know you're saying that's impossible, so at least try to get into every apartment at least once a year if you can, to do an inspection or have your technicians do an inspection. And in buildings or homes with a current bed bug infestation, we want inspection and treatment to occur every 2 weeks, so we avoid some of the pictures that I put there on the bottom so those infestations don't get too bad. So staff can play a role as inspectors. The inspection that we ask staff to do is much simpler than an inspection a professional would do. So essentially, you're just looking at the bed and sleeping area and looking for those signs to confirm, yes, there is an infestation. If bed bugs are present in an apartment, they're going to be on the bed or on that recliner that sits across from the TV. So if we just need to confirm, yes, there are bed bugs, to schedule a complete inspection and treatment by the professionals, that's something staff, you might think about staff doing. And if you're suspicious, you can always leave monitors and come back and check the monitors in 2 weeks. Okay, so I already made this point about inspecting the surrounding apartments. There's several types of traps out there. The most effective traps are something like this white trap, this cup shaped trap. I'm going to show you how it works in a second. Research shows that these interceptor monitors, we call them, are 95% effective when combined with visual inspections of detecting infestations. So they trap and kill bed bugs, and they can also tell us how bad an infestation is. So a couple types I have up here: the passive moat style climb up interceptor, this other do-it-yourself made just with recycled materials, and the active monitor, an active monitor with a lure. An example is the Sensei Active Volcano. Another one I just found out about with a lure is the Taro Scout, but I know nothing about that one. I have seen these two in action and they work. These are some of my photos, so I know firsthand, I see them working. They can tell us also if an infestation is eliminated as well, so they're really helpful in confirming elimination. The wells in the climb up, the white trap, tell us whether or not those bugs have come from outside the bed or from the bed and just work their way down into the slippery plastic that they can't get out of. So I forgot to mention that. So bed bugs are not the greatest crawlers. They cannot crawl smooth surfaces, so they get trapped in those in these devices. So IPM for bed bugs really starts with the base of our pyramid being the education and awareness piece, meeting with residents, having an educational uh, 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 piece to your control. Pest proofing and sanitation. Of course, bed bugs only drink blood, so it's not going to help to clean up food, but the more clutter around, the harder it is to control. Physical controls can include heat and cold, freezing, mechanical controls, encasements, barriers, and vacuums. And of course, pesticides have a role to play too, but they are the last resort and they should be used judiciously combined with all these other things. So I encourage you to know the treatment options. Vacuuming is really important. Isolation with encasements. I'm not going to go through all these. Freezing is an option for things that can't be treated. You can put things in the freezer. Heat can be clothes dryer, steam, container, whole unit, and of course, pesticides come in sprays, dusts, and fumigation. So why vacuum? In this case, this PMP, this pest management professional, was spraying pesticides right over that bed railing with a pile of shed skins and dead bed bugs. We don't know if this is a new infestation or if they solved the infestation, but he just kept on applying pesticides right over those dead bodies when we don't know if it's a current infestation or not. So we want to remove the evidence of the pest so the next time you come in, you can tell, is it active infestation or did we eliminate it? Also, the concern here is there's nymphs, there's baby bed bugs that hide in the shed skins and hide underneath those piles of bed bugs that become protected from the chemicals. And then eggs also, we can't kill eggs with chemicals. So vacuuming also helps to eliminate eggs, but they're sticky, so it's hard. Mattress encasements. Let's see, I think Josie gave me a note that you can order mattress encasements as well as one of your supplies. I often encourage the housing sites I work with to buy them in bulk and sell them at cost to residents if it's not in the budget to give them to residents. But these are really important because they can help prevent a resident from having to discard their mattress and box spring. I keep them on my bed. I'm exposed to bed bugs quite frequently. I don't want to have to throw out my mattress, so I have it encased so I would prevent it from becoming infested. And they have to stay on for a year. Heat's a really valuable tool, kills the eggs as well. This is a picture of a site we worked with in Philadelphia that decided to buy this ZapBug portable heat chamber. And the staff actually moved this heat chamber around from apartment to apartment, treating those really difficult items like the recliners, the wheelchairs, the baby cribs, and those pull-out sofas. So it's a portable heat chamber that gets set up like a tent and it's like cooks the bed bugs. There's also steam and the clothes dryers. I've worked with housing sites that have provided free tokens or provided free dryers somehow for their residents when they're having a bed bug uptick in bed bug infestations. And another housing authority I'm working with right now has bought a dryer specifically just for bed bug treatments. So think about solutions like that if you have that challenge with, and that of course will rely on your residents actually doing the laundry and using the dryer, which isn't always possible, I understand. Steam is great. It penetrates cracks and crevices. You don't need a license to apply steam, but you do need some training because it's slow. And this is a great method to treat beds and couches because it doesn't leave a pesticide residue, but it also doesn't leave it, it's not protecting you, so it only kills the ones that are there at that time. You're not going to be applying the pesticides, but it's important to understand what pesticide treatments are available, and it's really important to know there's no silver bullet. If there was something out there that worked really well, we'd all be using it and we wouldn't still be talking about bed bugs. So all the liquid residual pesticides have a limited effect. Most sprays only work on contact, so that's why inspection is really important. We have to find the bugs to kill them. The most effective chemicals that we have right now are neonicotinoid and pyrethroid combinations. Dusts are really effective as long as they stay dry and we don't put those in the hands of the residents because they will over apply them. And all your tools must be rotated. There's a new product called Apprehend. I'm still waiting on the verdict to find out from researchers if it is effective. I've heard good stories that it works in some cases, doesn't work in some other cases, but essentially it's a pathogen. It's a disease that the bed bug, you infect the bed bugs with, and then they pass it to each other because they all kind of cluster together. So again, we want the homeowners or the tenants to not be taking control into their own hands. That's going to push the bed bugs further into hiding and create more of a resistance problem. So the message here is the treatment should be a mix of all these different methods. Sorry, I'm breezing right through because we're running out of time. So meet with your staff, meet with residents, meet with the pest control technicians, make sure the work order system's auto-generating the follow-ups for those heavy infestations. With bed bugs, it's really important that we put the resources and time into those heaviest infestations first to prevent them from spreading outward. Know what the treatments are and understand how they work. Direct the time and the resources, I said that, sorry. And then evaluate the success or failure to eliminate the pests and figure out, wow, if we're doing everything right, what's the pattern in behavior maybe that the resident is, maybe the resident is bringing them in, or maybe there's an apartment nearby that is the source of bed bugs that we didn't even know about. And education and training is a continuous process. There's always going to be pest introductions, staff turnover, resident turnover, and new information available. So designate someone that's going to work with tenants. The key messages are we want them to inspect and report. We don't want them to self-treat. We don't want them throwing out furniture and picking up discarded furniture. We hope that they are occasionally laundering their bedding, the more frequently the better, and vacuuming if they can. So I encourage you to capture the low-hanging fruit first with posters and brochures, because some people will read that literature. I have some examples of picture-based literature for bed bugs. I'm still working on picture-based literature for cockroaches and mice, but talk to me if you need some materials in English and Spanish and other languages to communicate with residents some simple messages. The other option is to have classes and meetings and just be totally upfront with residents. It goes so much better if you give the impression that you're addressing the issues with residents so they don't get upset when they find out later. And then one-on-one intervention is sometimes needed, and I can give you some advice on that as well. I kept hearing about, everyone's taking in discarded furniture, so I made this poster. You can also download on the website. And when you encourage reporting, just let the residents know that there is a response plan, that they should save the insect, don't carry it around to the office, but save it in their own apartment so someone could positively identify it. They should report the problem. They shouldn't disturb the area by moving furniture around too much until somebody inspects, and they should not apply pesticides, and you should be scheduling the inspection of the unit and the adjacent units. So this is my work plan slide that I show at the end of my presentations. Usually I skip this for cockroaches and mice, but essentially a lot of the same things apply. Think about who's going to do what, who will do the education piece, who's going to do the monitoring, who's going to do the help with preparation when a resident can't do the preparation that treatments require, and laundry, encasements, visual inspection, furniture removal, and reviewing the records. So everyone should figure out who has those responsibilities. And then if you contract out bed bug control, or you have a policy or procedures, it should include monitoring all the high-risk units, inspecting neighboring units, realistic prep instructions. Do you think, giving that 2-page list of prep instructions where furniture has to be moved is realistic for an 82-year-old resident? Probably not, and probably not necessary if it's a low-level infestation. And then, of course, we want to mix it up with the different tools and follow-up treatments, scheduling about every 2 weeks and confirming the elimination. If we're not inspecting and seeing that there are no bugs and traps for a few weeks after or a few months after the treatment ends, how do we know that we've actually eliminated the infestation? Very often, we blame residents for continued infestations, but more often than not, it's because we didn't completely get rid of every bug in the treatment, and they just take a little bit of time to start reproducing to the point where we see them again. Whew, okay, so I did bed bugs in record time. The changes that you're going to see at NYCHA are the pest control professionals are going to be working more hand in hand with the other trades, and some of these responsibilities are going to be expanded. So a lot of this is going to sound like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of work, but some of these things, a lot of these things are only going to have to be done once or once every 10 years or so. You have to maintain the exclusion, but a lot of these, if you're using good products, will last very long. So as you can see, some of these new IPM responsibilities, I'm not going to go through each one, but a lot of things I mentioned, reporting housekeeping conditions, fixing leaks, escutcheon plates, door sweeps are all going to be under the purview of the maintenance staff, and the exterminators are going to add some additional tools like caulk and HEPA vacuums, and they're going to be sealing holes and doing better inspections. I think the most important piece and the biggest improvement is going to be the follow-up, the automatic follow-up work order that's generated, because we cannot rely on residents to complain. And as I said several times, can't just rely on one treatment to eliminate a problem. So the supplies that you should have available, your prevention and intervention strategies department has a full list, but just a brief overview is you're going to need the excluder mesh, the caulk, the escutcheon plates, foam, and masonite. So you want to make sure all your shops are equipped with these items so the staff can do their jobs, and get that full list from your prevention intervention strategies. The exterminators are going to have HEPA vacuums, and if you know of a team or a technician that does not have a HEPA vacuum, they should definitely contact Ronald Griffin. Looking at Josie's notes to make sure I haven't forgotten anything, and Josie, you can chime in here. Essentially, what Josie asked me to emphasize is that you can get this list and these a list of equipment from them. Bricklayer work orders should be made for fixing gaps around pipes that need concrete work, and if there are small holes, escutcheon plates and excluder mesh can be found on Oracle. Door sweeps can also be found on Oracle, and developments should be buying more sweeps and installing these where they're needed. I hope I captured your notes there, Josie.
Yeah, that's great. And as you were talking, I put a few of the HAs into the chat box. So if anyone just wants to grab an HA from the chat box, they can. You can, type it into Oracle. It'll pop up as well. If you have any problems, just reach out to me and I can let you know.
Okay, great. So there is a concerted effort to get these materials in the right hands. That's good to know. I just want to quickly just let you know my website is stoppest.org, and we have been collecting since 2007 resources specifically for affordable housing. There's this IPM guide for affordable housing, free download in English and Spanish. Webinars, I have additional webinars on very specific topics, like the one that I featured on August 29th was developing a pest exclusion program for cockroaches and rodents. So we have some opportunities for further training. We have pest solutions page that goes by pests. Even though I just talk about the three main pests, rodents, bedbugs, and cockroaches, we have pest solution pages for all the other pests that you might be running into. But you can definitely contact me. Say you have a flea problem and you would like some good advice on what are we supposed to do about fleas. That's what my job is, to provide you guys with good research-based information. There's also a section on the website, Working with Residents, where we have a resident briefing video, some ideas for helping with housekeeping. Also, when you use IPM, we have some resources for you, what lease language, what policy language you should we suggest, and various other resources for actually implementing IPM. I think the most helpful thing we have are these recorded webinars, because we've been collecting these for quite a few years with really the specialists in the field who really focus on their efforts on affordable housing. Oh, and I also have a blog for if anyone's interested. I have a Facebook and Twitter page and YouTube page as well, but I have to admit I'm not very good at updating those, but feel free to follow along. So again, the You'll have to take a quiz to get your certificate of completion. We'll work out the kinks if you can't get through get the link. Josie has put the link in the chat box. I would encourage you all to put your questions in the chat box right now and hang with us. I think I'm going a little over, but if we don't get to your question right now, that question is attached to your name and your email address, and we will get back to you. And I created the quiz, but I'm not going to concern myself with grading them. I'm going to send that on to NYCHA, and they will award you your certificate of completion. So the contacts that you should be aware of, NYCHA Pest Control questions, Ron Griffin and Denise Torres. If you have general pest control questions, you can always reach out to me by email, by phone, check out the website. And there again is all my contact information and that link, but copy and paste that link from the chat box if you can find it. Also, there's going to be a follow-up email that'll come to you tomorrow with that link to the quiz in the chat box. I mean, in the email, sorry. So Josie, were there questions in the chat box that I can answer, or?
No, does anyone have any questions? If you have any questions, type them into the chat box now. Nobody.
Wonderful. I guess I was just so complete. Oh, a question did come up from Alicia. Will PMPs be using steam or freezing methods to reduce pests? That I don't know. I think some of the techniques are still being worked out, but Josie, maybe you can answer that.
Yeah, I know that we have used different vendors for bed bugs to do steaming. Our exterminators, for the most part, do not. We use a vendor for those sort of methods.
It is a steamer. An industrial steamer is a worthwhile investment because it's so effective at killing bed bugs, and you don't need a license to apply steam. While you need a license to apply pesticides. So it's something that I see a lot of housing authorities taking in-house, that and those heat chambers, trying to complement their pest control technicians' work with some heat methods.
Yeah, I think we've been looking into it. So maybe, yeah, Ron Griffin is our technical advisor. He's looking over me. He's like, we are looking into steamers.
Oh, good. And then don't forget there are easy heat treatments, just the dryer, and is our best tool for bed bugs. Anything that can go in the dryer, even dry clean only items.
I got another question. Where can we get the copy of the slides? So this is going to be it'll be online, and Susanna will put that on the email when she sends it out to you. So you'll be able to just go to the website and access these slides. Let's see, Alicia, can you tell me the name of the round thing that was under the bedpost?
Yeah, those were interceptor traps. There's a bunch of companies that make them. Those were climb-up interceptors, and I think that's one of the things you guys will be able to order, Josie, that you have a supplier for the traps or monitors for bed bugs.
Oh, there is an HA for the climbers. You just go into Oracle and you would put in, I think, bed bug. But if you have a hard time finding the monitors, just email Ron Griffin. He'll direct you to it. But yeah, it's in Oracle. There's an HA for it. You can just order it like a regular supplies.
Yeah, Tina Chen was asking the same thing, where you can get the monitors. Hopefully, Tina, you heard that you can order them through the Oracle supplies.
Let's see. Are we going to initiate termination and tenancy proceedings for residents who do not access to exterminators? I mean, that's a higher up policy change. I know that you can do the informal hearing. You can bring people in. Right now, it's the usual process. We are going to start using right to entry for some extermination treatments. So that'll be something we'll be doing if we can't get into apartments. Pamela asked about HA numbers for the materials. Yes, anyone who has a hard time finding the materials, just shoot me an email and I can send you HAs for anything that you need. It was also a whole list was sent out for the targeted relief program. On that email, it has 15 different supplies items to get. And then Diana is saying
That's
that
an
she is,
interesting question.
yeah.
Well, Diana, I'm going to have to talk to you individually because I do not know anything about, and that is so interesting. Diana's saying that she's starting to see issues with possums, and how do I address? Wow. You know what? I do not know because that is a brand new question to me, but I assume it's going to have something to do with trash being left out. But let you know, let me see what I can find. But definitely address if there's any trash being left around that they have access to. And
if
go ahead. Sorry.
No, oh
Or
no, sorry. I was just saying that I've heard like for raccoons, and if they get into like uh, roof spaces or anything like that, we have used vendors to trap and then move to wherever they are moved. So if they're actually living in the building, please contact me or speak to your RAM about getting a vendor.
digging out basements. So she further added to the explanation that she's under the Sandy resilience and contractors are digging out basement dirt and replacing it with concrete. So maybe some of the construction has had something to do with that. But yeah, if they are getting into buildings, that's really good advice, Josie. That's a professional job that needs to be contracted out.
Michael Peterson says, when people vacuum the bed bugs, should there be a specific way to dump the debris from the vacuum, as it may contain living bed bugs or eggs? Can this cause spreading if not properly disposed of?
Okay, this is like a class unto itself. Yes and no. So one of the things I show when I do a class for residents is this pantyhose trick where you can, but this is going to be really hard to communicate with all your residents, but this trick, people tend to really love this. You can stick a knee-high pantyhose in if you have a vacuum with the hose attachment, and then you put back on the crevice tool, and anything you vacuum up, this works for fleas, bed bugs, cockroaches, and it gets stuck in the pantyhose, and then you dispose of it like that. So in the absence of that, residents should be dumping the debris from the canisters in a bag and then disposing it outside. Previous office where I worked, I had a lot of people coming in with bed bug samples, and when they left, I vacuumed and I disposed the contents of the dustbuster outside in a dumpster. I bagged it up and then threw it outside in the dumpster. If there are shared vacuums, that's a big problem because there is a chance that bed bugs could survive in a vacuum. I have heard, though, that it's not as big of a concern because normally this gets a little too technical into the weeds with the entomology of bugs, but bugs breathe through holes around the side of their body, and once they get clogged up with dust, that usually does kill them. So not a huge concern, but yes, we definitely want to encourage residents to dispose of if they're using their vacuums specifically on bed bugs, dispose of the contents in the bag or the canister. And for the professionals using vacuums, what the trick that they do is they can vacuum up a little bit of the diatomaceous earth or some of the other insecticidal dusts that will kill anything that goes into the HEPA vacuum.
Okay. Any last questions? I know we're a little bit over time, and you feel free to email me or Ron Griffin or Denise Torres with any NYCHA-specific questions. So thank you so much, Susanna. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much. And again, visit the website and let us know if you have any questions. It's my job to help folks understand and how to control pests.
And one last thing, make sure to take the quiz. We're going to be tracking that. You won't get credit for this training if you don't take the quiz. I put the link in the chat box, so use that. If you have a firewall, try another computer. There's been some issues with that, or speak to your IT contact. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks,
And
Susanna.
I'll share the website where I'll put up the copy of the slides, and you guys can put it up on your website too. But I just noticed another question about getting a copy of the slides. So yes, we'll make that available, and I'll try to put that in the follow-up email that you'll automatically gets generated. Okay. Thanks so much. I'm going to leave this slide up for a few more minutes, but at this point, this is the end of the webinar, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks.